W will be kind of taking a little bit of distance from the Central Asia Gulf country relations and look more broadly at how Central Asia use religion as a kind of soft power tool and a branding tool for its promotion abroad.
Actually, it will remain theoretically connected, of course, with the Gulf countries, but you're right. And, well, much has already been said by my colleagues today, but what I would like to do today is to address, so, as Marianne said, how religion is used by Central Asian countries as a branding tool to be more integrated in the international arena by first by showing respect to Islam to improve relations with Muslim countries, and second by showing respect actually to all kinds of religions to be more integrated in the international community at large. But at the same time, I would also like to show that all Central Asian states remain actually very cautious with the instrumentalization of religion for several reasons, and among them, a lot of states consider that promoting too much the image of Islam could be a risk to grow Islamism on their country. And I will also try to show that religion as a branding tool reveals actually the contradictory discourse on the part of the Central Asian authorities between a supposed stated commitment to tolerance and respect to religious liberty on the one hand, and high and still actually growing restrictions against the diversity of religious movements on their territories on the other hand. So I will use three examples. I will address 3 points today. First, one essential goal is to persuade the international community that the country respects religious freedom, shows tolerance concerning religious diversity at a time when the criticisms about the religious situation in Central Asia are growing. You see that in a lot of reports on human rights everywhere. This promotion has served each state in its attempt to provide itself with an image of respectability in the international arena. Actually, this practice is largely part of Soviet tradition. You know that in its confrontation with the capitalist West, the USSR tried to show to foreigners and above all to the states that wished for rapprochement with the Eastern Bloc its respect for certain elementary democratic norms. And this tactic proved particularly necessary in relation to Islam, as many third world countries that were aligned with the USSR were Muslim or contained large Muslim minorities. And for example, as of 1964, Central Asia was open to foreign delegations, and during the international conferences held there, Tashkent became a kind of showcase of Soviet Islam. And the USSR, in fact, sought to present itself not only as a state that treated its Muslims well, but as a Muslim power. And in return, the Soviet authorities made a certain number of concessions to Islam by, for example, opening in 1971 the Medrese al-Bukhari, or even by authorizing some publications like Musulmanie v Sovětském Vostoku. Which actually remained reserved for more for foreign readership, and it was barely disseminated locally. But today, I mean, all the countries, or most of the countries of Central Asia, try to organize events such as conferences, seminars, international meetings in which foreign participants are invited. And I will use today one specific example, which is very interesting, in my opinion, which is the Congress of Leaders of World and Traditional Religion in Kazakhstan. For more than 10 years, Kazakhstan has sought to promote its image internationally, to position itself as a model of economic development and social progress, and to engage in global political, economic, and religious debates. So, for example, it has even financed some US think tanks to write some reports on the country's political and economic development. It has invested in publicity campaigns to promote the image of the president Nursultan Nazarbayev. And in recent years, this promotional campaign has intensified, in particular following Kazakhstan presidency of the OSCE in 2010. Well, it's organizing the Expo 2017. The country was candidate to host the 2022 Winter Olympics, which finally, as you know, was awarded to Beijing, and so the Congress of Leaders of World and Traditional Religions. This Congress was initiated by Nazarbayev. It was first held in 2003 and it takes place in Astana every 3 years. To guarantee the international impact of this event, Nazarbayev has invested quite a lot of money, commissioned, for example, the construction of a pyramid meant to symbolize the openness of the country. The 4 sides of the pyramid are oriented to the 4 sides of the world, which embody an independent Kazakhstan that embraces all peoples of all nations, practicing all different religions. And this year, last year, we're in 2016, last year, 80 delegates from 42 countries attended this 5th Congress. Like the previous ones, the event brought together leaders from Muslim, Jewish, Christian, and Buddhist communities. Its main theme was, I quote, a dialogue of religious leaders and politicians in the name of peace and development. And it focused on how to counter the spread of radicalism and terrorism. It aimed to foster a culture of tolerance and mutual respect as opposed to ideologies of hatred and extremism. Political issues and questions of intra and inter-religious conflicts were addressed, and from this perspective, the Congress is looking for cooperation and collaboration with many international organizations and institutions aimed at promoting, among other, dialogue among religions, cultures, and civilization. For example, many representatives of international organizations were invited from the United Nations, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, UNESCO, World Islamic League, the Alliance of Civilization, Organization for the Security and Cooperation in Europe, and others. At the same time, what is interesting is that there is a sharp contrast between the presence of leaders of religious groups with large representation but extremely small presence in Kazakhstan, such as Buddhist, Taoist, Shintoist, Hinduist, or even Zoroastrian, and the absence of many other movements that have actually significant presence in the country, in Kazakhstan, but which were deliberately excluded from this event due to being non-traditional as a political discourse, and local media very often denounce them. The use of the adjectives universal or traditional in the title of the Congress is not accidental, and actually barely conceals the growing gap between official discourse with, for example, tolerance and openness, and very inconsistent application of religious rights. Kazakhstani legislation guarantees equal treatment of all religions, but at the same time promotes freedom for what it considers a traditional religion, so namely the majority religion Islam, the main minority religion Russian Orthodoxy, and some other Christian traditions such as Catholicism or Lutheranism. But as there are in the majority of former Soviet states, all the Protestant denominations such as Baptism, Seventh-day Adventist, Pentecostalism are increasingly challenged, denounced as foreign movements, and called non-traditional because, among other reasons, of their recent arrival. Most of these groups actually have been present on the Central Asian territory since the colonization of the Kazakh steppes, and stayed through the 20th century despite the Soviet regime's anti-religious policy. And now many of them are under growing pressures from administrative and administrative and criminal sanctions. This rhetoric of universal dialogue among the countries stands in stark contrast to an increasingly critical general religious situation in Kazakhstan, which is affecting all the country's religious community, traditional and non-traditional. And as you know, a new law on religion was adopted in 2011, which prohibited the activities of any unregistered movement and led to the closure of many religious organizations, police raids, detentions, and fines. And I mean, I was talking about Kazakhstan, but actually you have exactly the same phenomenon in other Central Asian republics, which organize, for example, conferences on religion or so-called religious tolerance or on extremism, and which thus try to conceal contradictory discourse on the part of the political authorities between a supposed state commitment to tolerance and respect for religious liberty and many restrictions against the diversity of religious movements on national territory. So for the political authority, it is a way to dodge the criticism to which they have been subject in the media and reports on religious rights. And for Kazakhstan, this campaign undeniably pays off because it is regularly relieved by global political and religious figures. And more broadly, the Congress tries to make Kazakhstan a state that respects human rights, even as since the 1990s it has moved from being open to political reform to a country more and more authoritarian in the post-Soviet space. It also involves efforts to legitimize Nazarbayev's policy to his people at a time when the president in power since 1989 is seeing more and more of these choices questioned, for example, Kazakhstan membership in the customs union. And when the social situation remains difficult, the Congress offers the populations a sense of prestige by building the country's international profile. And finally, the Congress seeks to put Kazakhstan forward as a model of balance between economic success, respect for human rights norms, and security discourse around Islamic threats. Kazakhstan thus is clearly participating in efforts to promote an autonomous development model of a state that is able to take initiative at the international level on par with the great powers without submitting to the pressures of the Western development model. Two more examples, which I will go much more quickly. My second point is after independence, actually often it was less religion than a religious fundamentalism and the risk of Islamist terrorism that the political authorities came to instrumentalize, in particular in Uzbekistan. They did so for plenty of reasons that you know, for example, to move a little bit away from Russia's influence, to draw closer to the United States, to elaborate a kind of common security discourse with China, or to justify repressive policies and silence, at least provisionally, Western criticisms about the repression conducted by this regime. So this is a very well-known point. I won't insist on that, but by mentioning that, I want to show that whereas using religious extremism has been a tool for most of Central Asian countries, this tool has its downside. by insisting on this danger, it risks, among others, discouraging investment. And it is on this point that, for example, Kazakhstan distinguishes itself a lot, as it has barely at all emphasized the risk and strives, on the contrary, to minimize it and show that it is capable of controlling it. So whereas Uzbekistan insists on the consequences of the Islamic State, experts and political personalities in Kazakhstan insist on the fact that they see no direct threat posed by the very small numbers of the country's citizens allegedly involved in these groups. And the Islamic State would only present a threat in the Middle East and see this as mainly related to Syria and Iraq for the foreseeable future. So in Kazakhstan, the authorities believe the security threats to be low and certainly manageable. And so in so doing, actually, Kazakhstan really aims to persuade foreign investors, especially in the energy sector, that the risk is both low and manageable. And my last point is how religion is instrumentalized as a way of obtaining Islamic financing. So Luca and Bruno already talked about that. So I would be very sure that, well, as Bruno has shown, Islamic finance has gained in visibility, and actually in respectability in Central Asia, especially in the midst of a full economic and financial crisis. And especially at a time when major Western powers were becoming less generous. So Islamic finance has two faces, which actually differ greatly from one another. The first one that Bruno talked a lot about is the Islamic Development Bank, and the second one, the second phase of Islamic finance, which is actually the most contested one, is embodied by the numerous private Islamic banks or stems from the sovereign funds of Gulf countries, which offer Islamic services to individuals. For Central Asian states which receive Islamic finance, their goal is threefold: to showcase their modern Islamic identity in keeping with that projected by the Gulf countries, which is used by their president as a form of nation branding in the international arena, to maintain the state's hold over a sector that arouses political suspicion, and to shore up for itself alternative investments that come without political condition. Well, Central Asia is far actually from affording Islamic finance the importance and corresponding institutional settings similar to those in other Muslim nations of the Persian Gulf or in Iran, Pakistan or Malaysia. And in a general way, the industry of Islamic finance has met with a number of obstacles in the region. Kazakhstan had so far no great need to borrow from abroad, and the other states are poor or more unreceptive, and the banking system in them is remains actually rather underdeveloped. And moreover, the taxation system constitutes an essential obstacle to Islamic financing. The Central Asian regimes impose high taxes when loans change hands, whereas this is a standard practice in the Islamic finance system. And in Central Asia, detractors of Islamic finance are concerned by the hidden religious activities of Islamic financiers and delight actually in the defiance of a part of the Central Asian populations in opting against non-secular banking products. So the perception of these Islamic products in Central Asia remains an issue where Sharia law remains very often assimilated to Islamic radicalism. The position of the Central Asian states towards Islamic finance is paradoxical, since all of them want to attract additional investments that don't come with conditions in terms of politics or reforms. but their fears of a radical Islam curbs their engagement in favor of Islamic finance. This was the case with the so-called spillover from Afghanistan, and the question is concerning them even more with the rise of the Islamic State. So I will conclude here because I think I already talked too much, but very quickly, I mean, I used today three examples to show how religion is used as a branding tool on the international arena, which actually shows that first there's a profound difference between the image of freedom and of respect of religious rights being to the outside and the local reality, as was the case under the Soviet regime, by the way. And second, Central Asia countries are very cautious in how they use their Islamic identity abroad as much as they are in their domestic policy. This is exactly actually what Luca was saying a few minutes ago. They try to find a balance between promoting their Islamic identity, but at the same time they remain extremely cautious, much more cautious than many other Muslim countries in the world, which is shown by how religion is controlled and often repressed inside these countries. And when I say actually religion, I mean here, especially in Islam, since in Uzbekistan, for example, also the situation of the Christian movement is highly concerning. Regularly practicing Muslims have more pressure applied to them than believers belonging to a minority movement. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you.